Talk, talk, talk. It's the first time that I do something that long.
Really? Yeah.
Usually it's just like 20 minutes, so it's fine. But an hour, I don't know. We will see.
Yeah, it's long. Tell us if you need a pause or something like that.
But sometimes what is important is just like to see faces that people keep following. 20 minutes, you know that people are doing, like they are following, but about an hour, I think like getting the attention is more a problem. So
yeah, and with Zoom especially, because usually people turn off their cameras and it's like, okay, whom am I talking to anyway?
Yeah.
And there was a thing about the bandwidth that is used for the image. So technically it's not good for the Earth to broadcast everything.
Right.
But then I don't know.
So.
Okay, so we are now live on YouTube and also on our web page.
Perfect.
Wow, what an infrastructure.
Actually, it's really simple to start streaming. It's
really
crazy. Yeah. It's just a click. You just need to like connect one Google account with your Zoom, and then it's basically like 3 clicks.
Okay, didn't know that.
It's really, Zoom is really prepared for that. I wasn't aware of it either, but yeah, when we were uploading the whole program, we got several like mails and stuff from people asking if they could get access to the YouTube stream.
Okay, no, that is very interesting because it looks like it's gonna keep being like that for quite some time. So I mean that's the thing. I spend most of my time in Basel these days, and in Bern, and it seems that the Swiss German university have decided pretty quickly that for the year it was over. But in Geneva, they still think we're gonna start again in February.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I kind of have doubts about that. So we will see. We started the seminar, the year totally normally in the room without the mask, with the students in the class.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think for the first 2 weeks we were also allowed to do stuff without masks if there are not too many people in the room. So yeah, and then it's gradually got into a different direction.
So I see that there are Ludmila and Alexandre who might intervene. I don't know.
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Ludmila has been working 9 months for the project, and Alexandre has been an intern for I don't know how many months, but also like 5 or 6, something like that.
Sounds good.
So it's part of a class, or no? It's totally extra.
No, it's a class.
Okay.
It's like a regular lecture, but we decided to not have it every week, but instead couple it with workshops, so that people not only have to listen but also can create or do some stuff, and that worked quite nice.
Okay.
I think. I mean, that's my opinion. I organized it. So.
I'm sure it does. Okay.
I will briefly introduce you in like 2-3 minutes, as soon as everybody's is online, and then I will say something about they produce blog posts for the Hypothesis platform, and I think that that's working very well as well. So I'll mention that, and then you will have the floor.
So I do share only not the entire desktop. You only see the PDF, like the slides. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I start the recording now, just that you know.
Okay.
Ja, herzlich willkommen zu unserer zweitletzten Sitzung der Ringvorlesung Einblick in die Digital Humanities. Wir haben heute wieder einen Beitrag aus der Schweiz, aber auf Englisch. Bevor wir aber zu unserem Referenten kommen, vielleicht ganz kurz der Hinweis, dass die ersten Blogposts online sind auf einblicke.hypothese.org. Ich poste auch noch kurz den Link in den Chat. Ich glaube, die Posts sind wirklich sehr gelungen, also mir gefallen sie außerordentlich und offenbar gefallen sie auch dem deutschsprachigen Team von Hypothese, da die mehrere Beiträge bereits für die Startseite ausgewählt wurden und dann auch entsprechend Aufmerksamkeit in den sozialen Medien und so weiter bekommen haben. Daher glaube ich, das ist ein gutes Format. Sie haben aber dann auch die Möglichkeit im Rahmen der Evaluation der Lehrveranstaltungsevaluation mir diesbezüglich Rückmeldungen zu geben, wenn Sie nicht so glücklich waren mit den Blogposts als Leistungsnachweise. But for our main act of today, we'll switch to English. I have the honor and the pleasure to present you Simon Gabay. He studied at Paris 4 Sorbonne at St. Andrews, and he wrote his PhD at the Venerable University of Amsterdam. So he pretty much came around. And since 2020, so quite recently, he joined the University of Geneva, the new DH team that's being developed there. Before he was at the University of Neuchâtel, where he really made some DH happen at the university where there was not that much before, I must say. So it's really great to have Simon back in Switzerland and doing different stuff in this DH world. He's mostly concerned with ediciones, so like trying to bring together a corpus of French, of classical French texts and French language resources, and this is also what he's going to talk today. Merci Simon pour être ici, and oh yeah, I need to mention one thing. We will have to skip the workshop today. We're really afraid. We had some technical problems. It's my fault, but I promise that I will bring back Simon sometime in the spring or the latest in autumn, as soon as the epidemiological situation allows for it. But now to you, Simon, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here virtually.
Hi everyone. Sadly cannot do it in German. That would take a bit of time and would be maybe too complex, so I try to do it in English. So thank you very much, Tobias, for inviting me presenting this work. It's actually the first time that it's really presented somewhere, and like all the more or less final things. So I'm very happy to present that for the first time at the University of Bern. So everything is not perfect. We're still working on the project, but we're almost at the end. So I hope it will be interesting for everyone to understand what we've been working on for the past month. So I have to start saying that I have not been working alone on that, and that many people that have been working on this project are attending the presentation. And if there are some specific questions that I can answer to, I'm sure that they will help me, or even sometimes can understand better than me to some specific questions. So Lucie Rondeau started at the University of Neuchâtel as an intern. Ludmila Petmovic worked for a few months as a collaborator. Mathias Gillet-Vanson, PhD student in Lyon as well. Alexandre Barthes has been an intern as well at the École des Chartes and the University of Neuchâtel. And finally, Mohamed Remarem at the INRIA. So it's been supported by many institutions. We started in Neuchâtel, ended up in Geneva. We've been funded by the FNS, and we had a lot of support from the INRIA in Paris, which gave us a lot of technologies, and especially GrowBit, which will be the major attraction, technologically speaking, about the thing that we've done with these projects. So thanks to all of them. And maybe you will see them during the questions. So once again, we're presenting here some preliminary results. Some modifications might be introduced into the final data workflow, but still, it's more or less what we've done until now. So the idea we started with is the question about quantifying the unknown. Actually, it's a fairly common task to try to know what we don't know. For instance, when you're in a country and you need to know how many undocumented immigrants there are, this is something you need to know because you need to feed them, you need to know how many people are working, but you cannot know how many there are because they are undocumented. Same thing for the part of the GDP that is not declared, like undeclared work, or for instance, prostitutions, drug dealers, which are now included in the GDP by the European Union, for instance, but you don't know how many things are undeclared by definition. Or finally, how many species survive a natural disaster? You don't know how many there were at the beginning. How do you know what is left after the natural disaster? What is interesting is that the last question has been used to evaluate not unseen species, but unseen manuscripts. Let's try to be slightly more precise. The question of lost books and lost manuscripts have attracted several publications. Started with Weizmann in the 80s with the evolution of manuscript traditions. And since we have seen many documents and many articles and books about the topic, like again wrote about multi-copy documents for printed text, Jean-Baptiste Camps and Julien Randon-Furling in Lausanne in 2018, presenting a dynamic model of manuscript transmission. And finally, this year, Volker Karsdorp and Mike Estemont presenting a paper about estimating the loss of medieval literature with an unseen species model from ecodiversity. So we go back to the question that I've just asked. What is the problem? Is that when you're a medievalist, you have a text, but you don't have the original. You have copies, and sometimes copies of copies, and copies of copies of copies of copies. This is called a stemma, and manuscripts are slowly produced, so they appear, but they also disappear. And what we have at the end is just some of the manuscripts that were produced at the beginning. We see here, it's based on Trovato, a famous Italian philologist, the deprecation of the stematological tree of the document. First, only 3 copies, and at the end, everything is lost and we only have copies of copies. The problem is, how do you assess what has been lost? Because then you need to know that to reconstruct the entire tree and the entire tradition, textual tradition of a text. This led to the following graph, for instance, by Weizmann. How many manuscripts are produced and how many manuscripts disappear over time? This is the graph for Latin. So we see production, birth rate, and death rate over time. So we see the birth rate going up, sometimes going down. We can see the Carolingian Renaissance, we can see the High Renaissance, etc., etc. So it's very interesting. And with that, you can assess what has been lost and what remains. Lately, Karsdorp and Kestemont, I've just talked about them, have produced the following graphs about the percentage of surviving documents and the percentage of surviving text of the following traditions: Dutch, French, English, Icelandic, and German epic, usually medieval. And so this is what still exists. It's interesting to see that it's slightly different from one tradition to another, but this is not what we will work on, and we let them work on this topic. What is interesting is that they do have a problem. They never know how many copies did exist at the beginning. They only have what is left. So to evaluate what has existed based on what is left, what they do is that they apply mathematical models. For instance, the Chow model that is used by Karstorp and Kensmont to produce the following graph. This is the following equation. Basically, they take from multi-copies documents and texts, those who have only a few copies, and they try to deduce out of that how many might have existed. Then we can reverse the problem. The idea is, for instance, Tovato have tried to see how many incunabula we have of a specific traditions on how many are left. Because he knows how many copies were printed, and he knows how many are kept in libraries. The problem is that, are we sure that what we have in libraries is enough to know what still exists? Some documents are still circulating on the private market. They are sold by private collectors. So what is in libraries is not everything we have. So I do know that for incunabula, we know pretty much quite well what exists and what does not exist. But the problem is different when you look for manuscripts, and especially autograph manuscripts, modern autograph manuscripts. That is to say, manuscripts that have been written by the author, not a copy. Modern because it has been written usually in the 16th, but mainly 17th, 18th century, sometimes 19th century. For that, and for many authors, sometimes, we know how many letters, let's say, were produced, because we have an edition, they were printed. But over time, some of them have been lost. So we know how many existed, but we don't know how many still exist. And for that, we will try to see if we can understand how many manuscripts still exist, but we cannot access them. How many are still on the private market? For that, we will use Madame de Sévigné as a test case. Marie de Rabutin-Chantal was born at the beginning of the 17th century in France, and she died at the end of the 17th century. She is probably the most famous letter writer for French literature, and her letters are published anonymously after her death. In the middle of the 18th century, the granddaughter burns most of the remaining material, but some manuscripts still survive. For instance, on the left here, you have a manuscript that is kept in the collection of Emmanuel Lorient, a famous librarian in Paris, a collector as well. And some of them are kept in public libraries, not in private collection. Public libraries or sometimes public archives, such as the one on the right, which is kept at the Archives départementales de la Côte d'Or in Dijon. The problem is how many documents of a given author still exist, and among them, how many are accessible to scholars? That is the question which we will try to answer. We want to calculate how many autograph manuscripts of Sévigné are still circulating on the market, and therefore assess precisely what is inaccessible because it's still held in private collections by combining three different sources of information. These sources of information have been gathered for multiple secondary sources. First, a list of French autograph manuscripts, which has been created for the occasion. This is something crucial. For 17th century French, we don't know how many manuscripts we have. We don't know where they are. So what I've done is that I went in many libraries and I created a first list of all the manuscripts that still exist, old style philology. And the second thing is that I had to find how many documents are still held in historical private collections. For that, we have many philologists who have done the work of editing the text of Sévigné, and we do know from Duchesne, the last good edition of Sévigné, that some of them are kept by rich aristocrats that have kept all the manuscripts. And then a list of manuscripts drawn from fixed price and auction catalogs, which contains the description of hundreds of thousands of manuscripts sold over decades. So we have one, what we have in libraries, two, in old collections from aristocrats, three, what is still sold on the private market. Existing manuscripts of an author are either kept accessible in libraries and archives, or more or less hidden in private collections. The problem is that if we know how many manuscripts are kept in these libraries, for which we have catalogs, C, those kept in private collections, is unknown. To know what it represents, we can divide it into two. On the one hand, we have historical collections, usually inherited by old families, well documented and extremely static over time. And on the other hand, there is an unknown amount of documents circulating between private collectors. If we cannot know the amount of documents circulating and being held by private collectors, we can use a proxy. We can deduce what is still on the market by subtracting what is owned, because it has been bought by libraries, from everything that has been sold. And because buyers are constantly intervening on the market, any value is only true at time t. This number is evolving all the time. That is to say, the date of the last sale catalog taken into account, assuming that all the previous ones have been analyzed. With all this information, we can now deduce how many manuscripts still exist if we know everything that has been sold, and this is what we're trying to do. So for that, a bit of history and going back to the market. At the beginning of the 19th century, in France, but pretty much everywhere, we start to have a market for manuscripts in Europe. Before that, it was mainly aristocrats exchanging documents, because most of the writers were aristocrats themselves, like Madame de Sévigné. So they were the granddaughter having a few manuscripts, giving them to a cousin that would know someone in Paris, to whom you would give one manuscript, etc., etc. But with the 19th century, there is a slow structuring of the market throughout the entire century, with a major player for the French market, the Charavet dynasty, two brothers, Jacques and Gabriel, and all their descendants. So what they do is that they publish many catalogs that can help us reconstitute the market of everything that has been sold. And they produce two kinds of catalogs, auction catalogs and fixed price catalogs. This is a typical auction catalog. So we have here several lots, several entries, manuscripts of writers that have been sold. We know that it's an auction catalog because there is no price. There is a manuscript of Adolphe Adam, Francesco Albani, Jean-Jacques Leron d'Alembert, Alexandre Ier. So we see that there are quite famous people there. And this is a fixed price catalog. It looks more or less the same. The difference is that there is a price. So the first, Laure Permont, Duchesse d'Abrantès, is 10 francs. Alexandre Ier, Empereur de Russie, is 25 francs, etc., etc. We see that on both catalogs, you have very, very important writers. Here at the end, you have Jean-Louis Gué de Balzac, célèbre écrivain du XVIIe siècle, one of the most famous letter writers of the 17th century in France. This market is organized by major players. One is Gabriel Charavet, born in 1818 and dead in 1879. He is a very interesting character because he used to be an extreme left revolutionary from Lyon. And he founded a first journal called L'Amateur d'Autographe. He was the first editor for many years, and then he started having his own business as a manuscript dealer. And he founded another journal, La Revue des Autographes, des Curiosités de l'Histoire et de la Biographie. With these documents, we had in France two journals, the Revue des Autographes and L'Amateur d'Autographe. It was too much for small markets. So the publication of the Revue des Autographes stops, and it slowly becomes a fixed price catalog, published regularly, almost monthly, under the name of a journal. This modification can be seen in the evolution of the layout, smaller font, 2 columns, because it's easier to browse, and we have usually 200 entries per catalog. Here you have the evolution of the layout of the catalog. This is very important because when we will have to make data extraction, the layout will be important. On the left, you have the original layout with 1 column, and on the second, the 2 columns layout at the end of the 19th century. And now we move to the question of the encoding. What we want to do is to transform all these catalogs, which are basically held in libraries, just paper, into a database that we can query so that we can solve the problem that we have presented before. Know how many manuscripts have been sold on the market, know what is in the library, and deduce from that what is still on the market and that we don't know of, maybe. For that, we will start with the image, and we will end up with data going from one step to another, from the PDF to the XML to a full ETI encoding, then some JSON, some Python script to have all the data. The first step is OCR. I have put here the address of the GitHub repo on which you can find our data, because if we started with Transcribus and we were quite happy with it, with a 0.7 CR and something like 18,000 lines for 19th century prints. And here I have to say that I have to thank Tobias, because without him, we would never have had this model. And probably this project would not be there without his help, trying to help us understanding what was the problem with Transcribus something like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. So this is the occasion to say thank you officially, Tobias. But recently, we have decided to try something else, slightly different, to move to something fully open source. So we are not using the HDR model and engine of Transcribus, but we are using Kraken, which is open source and developed at Paris Sciences et Lettres, PSL, by Benjamin Kiesling. And what is interesting also with this OCR engine is that you can, at the same time, train an OCR model, but also a segmentation model. This is brand new. And you also have now an app that you can use. So there is not only the OCR engine, but also the full application around it that helps you make it run easily, at least locally, because you can download it from the GitLab. So you have more or less Transcribus on your own computer. At the one hand, it's very good for certain things. It's fully open source. You can do whatever you want with the data, but you also have some problems. You need some technical expertise and also a very good computer. And if you don't have that, Transcribus might be a good option, trying to also give here the pros and cons about the two solutions. But what interested us was trying to be as open source as possible. So we are trying to migrate from Transcribus to eScriptorium and Kraken to distribute all the data. This obviously creates some problems, because if it's something that you can do easily with Transcribus, which is to keep typographic information, mainly bold and italic, it's much harder to do that when you have a normal OCR engine without the full Transcribus application. So we're currently working with Thibaut Cléris at the École des Chartes and Ludmila Petkovic, who is here, and Caroline, I don't know if she's there, on a small application that will help us create a model to recognize when it's still bold, when it's in italic, and when it's normal Roman type. Which is to say that we will end up with 3 different models, one for segmentation, because it's pretty complex to segment these kind of documents. Second, an OCR model, and then a third model for typographic information, bold and italic, and you will see why it is very important to have this information. So basically, the idea is that from the image that you have on the upper part of the image here, you have here a basic entry of a manuscript of Madeleine de Scudéry that is sold, and gets the text down there. So for the little story, Madeleine de Scudéry is one of the most famous novel writer of the 17th century, and she's here writing a letter to another famous person, Huet, which was a bishop in Avranches. And this letter is about a third person who is also very famous, Nicolas Boileau Despréaux, probably one of the most famous poets of the last decades of the 17th century. What we need to do is we want to transform this paper that has become an image, that has become a TXT file into a database, is to do a bit of modelization. So what we do is we try to understand what is what and what is recurrent from one entry to the other. In brown, we see that we have the lot number. In red, we see that we have the name of the author. In orange, we have short biographical description of the author. In blue, the philological description of the document. LAS stands for lettre autographe signée, sign autograph letter. And then in purple, the price of the document. And the French quotation mark means franc. And in grid, an additional note that is optional, only for the most famous document. So here it's a letter of Madeleine de Scudéry, one of the most famous novelists of the 17th century, who created a special genre, précieux, whose nickname was La Sappho moderne, and she was born in Le Havre. It's an autograph letter signed to Huet, this famous bishop, in 1686. It's 3 pages long. It's in quarto. It's worth 100 francs, which is a lot. And then it's just an interesting letter about Monsieur de Bonnecorse, and the author is a good man from her friends. And Boileau, this famous poet, has written 6 verses about Lustrigo that are worth nothing. And then what is also interesting is that the person selling the document explained that it's a famous epigram starting with the following verse, Venez Pradon et Bonnecorse, etc. So we see that it's interesting because it gives a lot of information about how do we describe a manuscript, and that evolves with time. There is the technique of manuscript description is different at the beginning of the 19th century and the end of the 19th century and what we have now. And also what is interesting, what does the buyer want? That is an interesting source in terms of Rezeptionsgeschichte, or how do we perceive the literature? How is it famous? What interests the buyers? We see that it's full of information. Another information is the price. Obviously, the more expensive the manuscript is, the more interesting it was considered at the time, etc., etc., etc. So we want to get these data, but not only that. Then we have to go into GrowBiz. For that, we have to create new models. So we have a segmentation model, an OCR model, a typographic model, and then we have GrowBid models. What is GrowBid? GrowBid Dictionaries is a GrowBid sub-project. It has been documented by Mohamed Remaren in 2018 with Axel Herold and Laurent Romary. All the bibliographical informations are always at the bottom of the slide if you want to have more information, and I can give the slide to Tobias, who will give them to everyone that is attending and interested in that. So it implements a Java machine learning library for structuring digitized lexical resources, mainly dictionaries. That is why it's called GrowBid Dictionaries. But also any entry-based documents with encyclopedic and bibliographic content. Why? Has been designed to encode dictionaries and create databases, lexicographic databases online. But because a catalog looks like a dictionary, we can use GrowBid dictionaries with catalogs, or anything that looks like a catalog or a dictionary, entry-based documents, basically. What it allows, it's parsing, extraction, and automatic structuring of text information for such resources. It works with cascading CRF models, one for each level of the XML hierarchy. That I would develop in the workshop precisely how it works, but the idea is that it's only not one model, but if you take the XML, you see that it's like a tree, that you have several nodes, and like the Russian dolls, you have one into the other, into the other, into the other. You need one CRF model for one level of nesting. So if you have 5 levels of nesting, you need 5 CRF models, which means that you need to try 5 different models. That is why it's a bit time consuming. But at the end, what you have is an XML encoding that is the one of a dictionary, not of a catalog, because it has been created for dictionaries. So basically how it works is like that. You have several levels: dictionary segmentation, dictionary body segmentation, lexical entry, and then grammatical group, etymology, grammatical group, substance, and then etymology and grammatical group. What you have to do is to find a way, if you don't have a dictionary, to make your data fit into that scheme. And for each level, you will have the following elements available: headnote, body, and footnote for the first level, entry for the second level, lemma, variant, inflected, etym, etc. for the third level. So you have to pick up the kinds of elements you need, and then you train a model for this specific level And depending on the elements that you've chosen, you will only be able to choose some of those that are available at the next level, okay? Then you can really ask me if it's not clear. I'm trying to be clear here, and with the workshop, we can go back to this question. But basically the idea is not one model, several models, one model per level in the nesting of the XML. How does it work? That is also important, is that Gabay dictionaries uses features. It's a mixture of textual and contextual data. So for instance, let's take, once again, the same catalog entry. It starts with a number and then the name of the author. But we see that the number is always at the extreme left, slightly in the margin. Then you see that the author is in bold. And then at the end of the name of the author is parenthesis and then the comma. And you switch from the biographical information to the philological description of the manuscript that is sold with a dot and a dash. And then you switch from the price to the additional note using French quotation marks, the closing ones. These are the features that will be used. So you need to see if you have these that are recurrent. The structure is important, but not only the structure. Also, these features help. The more you have, the more powerful the system will be. The less you have, the more training data you will need and the more mistakes it will do. Then, depending on how much data you have, you can train different kinds of models. There is also the question that we've tried with Lucie Rondeau-Dunoyer, and there is the abstract just done for the TI conference in 2019. Here's the question is like, can we mix the data, training data, from different kinds of catalogs? Let's say I have a dictionary and Tobias have some catalogs of manuscript in Zurich and I have my 19th century sold fixed price catalogs. If we mix all that, does it help? Yes, sometimes it does. For instance, at the entry level, it does help because an entry is more or less always the same. It starts at the beginning of a new line and it's clearly divided from the rest. But then inside, it's slightly harder to make it work. At the end, what we have is the following XML encoding. So this is when it works perfectly. Let's say that it works pretty well, but sometimes it does mistakes. So you need to include some time for manual correction of the data. But what you have here, and you recognize it if you know a bit of TEI, is some elements from TI Lec 0 and mainly elements from TI for dictionaries. Sense and subsense doesn't make sense for a catalog of manuscripts. So what we need to do is transform lexicographic encoding into a dedicating encoded just for us. So this is the third step. This is to have all the XSLT, ODD documentation, etc., etc. And then we end up with another encoding that is the one that we need for catalog entries. An item with a number, the name of the author, then traits in TI is for biographical information in which you need a P, that is the structure of TI that is like that. Then a desk, the description of the documents, and then an additional note that you encode with a note. So more or less on the fly, starting from the paper from which you take a picture, you can authorize it, group bid it, transform it with an XSLT, control the structure with an ODD or a schema, and end up with the database almost automatically structured. And the idea is to do that on a large scale, not one or two catalogs, which usually have 200 entries, but thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of entries to build the biggest database we can about movements of manuscripts and description of manuscripts of famous writers in France. Then when you do all that, it's very interesting. You have a database of what has been sold. But we thought, well, this is engineering. This is not human sciences. This is not the thing that really interests us. What we want is like to know something, not produce data. Data is in a way useless. It's not used for something. So we have decided to try to reconciliate entries. Why? A manuscript can be sold multiple times on the market. So you will need to find the same manuscript sold over the time. As time goes by, some manuscripts reappear on the market. So you have here the Revue des Autographes in 94, and the same Revue des Autographes in 97. We see that the description is slightly different. It's shorter on the right, slightly longer on the left, but it really looks the same. Sévigné, Marie de Rabutin Chantal, marquise de, la célèbre épistolière, fin de lettre autographe à sa fille, au Rocher, 12 août 1685, 3 pages in quarto, suivi de 2 pages autographes d'Emmanuel de Coulanges. This is important, all this data that I translate very quickly because you will see that just after. So it is Madame de Sévigné, who is a letter writer. This is the end of a letter to her daughter, Madame de Grignan, written at Les Rochers, which is the name of her castle in Brittany, 12 August 1685, 3 pages in quarto, plus 2 pages autograph of Emmanuel de Coulanges, the uncle, and then a note of a different size. It has the same price. So we see that first doesn't evolve with time. But then, if we look more carefully, in 1902, there is another part of the same manuscript. It's still written the 12 August 1685. It's still to Madame de Grignan. It's still a fragment of a letter, but it's not the end. It's not 3 pages long. It's only 2 pages long. So it's a different price because it's shorter. It's not 200, but it's 125. So here we have the same manuscript broken into several pieces. So the question is like, to what extent can we do things with that? And this is still work in progress on which we've been working a lot with Matthias, I don't know if he's here, and Alexandre. Can we reconcile entries and maybe try to reconstitute the manuscripts? So the idea is that you need to compare items that are sold. So to do that, what we do is that we work only on the description of the manuscript. This is the idea, and then we know that a description of a manuscript, technically, if it's the same manuscript. Same date, same place, same length, same format. It's like a social number. So we forget the rest, we forget the note, we forget the biographical information, we keep the name of the writer, and then we have the author's name, the type of the document. Is it a letter, a document? This is the difference that they have. Autograph letter signed, autograph letter not signed, letter signed but not autograph, document signed. There is all a taxonomy, a classification of the type of documents. So the author's name, the type of document, the writing date, the length in pages, the format in quarto, in folio, in octavo, etc., and then the price. The problem is that some parts of this information is subject to change because the price can evolve and the length can change if the manuscript is cut into pieces. So we cannot say the same manuscript is when all this information are the same. We need to find a way to solve that. So here are the information about the 3 documents that I've just shown. The Revue des Autographes, 3 different versions and the same letter. And we see that the first time it's twice the same letter. And the third time, you can see it's the same letter, but computationally, how do you say that? Or how do you try to make the computer guess it's the same document? Then we have some Python scripts that try to do that. Once again, fully open source and available. If you want to have a look, if you want to comment, if you want to participate, you're more than welcome. And the first thing that we need to do is to add information to what we had from GrowBit. This is the work when I say additional information extraction from Matthias and also from Alexandre. This is this. In the desk, you see now that we have tagged with more TI elements. Term, to precise the kind of document. Date, to know what is the date. Then the length, then the format, then the currency, and we try to get that. But we try to have that automatically using Python libraries and trying to add more and more data. Actually, if you look at the date, we also have an attribute when that transform the date into something standardized and ISO compatible to make it easier to compare. One of the challenges for revolutionaries, because in France they have the revolutionary calendar, which is not the normal calendar. That creates problem, and the problem with the Julian calendar, the calendar they have in Russia, can also create some problems. But let's say that in France in the 19th century, most of the documents sold are French or Western, so that is more or less okay. So the idea is that you take this information here in XML, and to have a script that goes faster, what we do is that we transform that into a small JSON document, and then we have tons of these documents so that we can compare them all together. And what we do is that we apply a bonus malus system. So after filtering on a single author, we filter on a single author, because if we do that for all the authors, it's clearly doable, but we need a super powerful machine and a lot of time to compare everything with everything. If you filter on an author, it's much faster, because you reduce the amount of documents that you need to compare with all the others to 50, 60, maximum 100. Then if you have 40,000 that you need to compare to all the other 40,000, then it makes the thing way too complicated. So what we do is that we try to compare one document to another and to offer a score for each pair. So we have tried to create a system of bonus and malus. So if the type of document is the same, we add some plus 0.2, and if it's not, we add a note, a grade of minus 0.1. Same thing for the writing date, and we have tried to play with the different bonus and malus. So this is not properly tested now. This is like experimentation. We have seen that it works or it doesn't work, but we would need to have proper figures to see if it really works and assess the quality of the algorithm. But right now, it works. So we can also do that with the length, the format, and the price. And by doing that, you can create pairs, and then a bit RDF-like, you can create clusters, and then you have one cluster is the same manuscript sold multiple times over time, okay? And then back to Sévigné. The manuscript that have been bought by libraries, some manuscripts that have been bought by libraries and are now accessible. In the case of the two manuscripts of Sévigné we presented, one is kept in Paris and one is kept in Princeton. So this is an interesting information. I've said at the beginning that I have a list of the manuscripts held in libraries, and we have built a database of the manuscripts sold. So the first thing that we can do is reconstruct the history of the manuscript before it came in the library. Sometimes it's an information that the library have. Sometimes it's not. So we can provide this information to libraries. Your documents come from there, and it's been bought there and there and there. And let's say it's a bit like food. It's important to trace back the history of a document, because the more you know about it, the more you're sure that it's a genuine document. You shouldn't forget that when there is a market, there is money. And when there is money, there are forgeries. Because a manuscript of Madame de Sévigné today, I have seen one, it's something like 10 pages. It costs 72,000 euros on the market. Euros because it was sold in Paris. So it's not the price of a painting of Leonardo da Vinci or something like that, but still 72,000 euros is quite a bit of money. So you have a lot of forgeries, especially in the United States, but also in France. I have identified forgeries in Germany, in Caen, in Paris, a lot in New York, and in many other places. So if you know how old is the document, where it comes from, who bought it, then you're more or less sure that it's a good document, that it can be trusted as something genuine. Second thing is that we can know at what time the manuscript got fragmented, or at least the first time it appeared in the fragmented version. And for instance, this one, there is a note at some point that is given by a manuscript dealer that explains that it was a rich guy at the beginning of the 19th century that had a lot of friends. And because he wanted to give souvenirs to all his friends, he would take manuscripts of famous writers, cut the manuscript into small pieces, and give a small piece to all his friends. So we end up having manuscript of Madame de Sévigné in 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 different pieces, because one was given to a German friend and another one to the Bishop of Paris, another one to the boss, etc., etc. But that is also interesting because it gives an idea of what is the history of all these documents, thanks to the reconstruction of their history in the private market, because this information are kept with the documents that are sold. And this is something that is well known for medievalists too, because in the 19th century, they would cut illumination in the manuscript and sell that and throw away the rest. So basically, you can trace back the history of the documents. And the idea also is the following, is that you have many documents that are sold. And you can reduce that to types of AM autograph manuscripts. So you know that one manuscript has been sold multiple times. And at the same time, you know what is in the library. So technically, you can deduce what is in libraries and what is not, but has been sold on the market. And by doing that, you can assess the manuscript that exists, but that you cannot see. For instance, here, the green and the red manuscripts do exist. They have been sold for the red multiple times on the market. But because it's not in libraries, but in private collections, you do not know where it is. And this is what we've tried to do at the beginning, this question of quantifying the unknown. We don't know how many are in private hands, but with this technique, we can, with time, slowly understand what still exists and what we don't have access to. We have created a first sample on which we're still working. So we have done that in a few months. 200 fixed price catalogs of the Revue des Autographes, 30 fixed price catalogs of Lettres, Autographes et Documents from not Gabriel Charavet, but his brother, Jacques, 40 fixed price catalogs of La Verde, which is the very, very beginning of the market, 60 auction catalogs from Charavet, and Ludmila is still working on 60 more in preparation. And we're still working on more than that. So to give an idea, I think that without the 60 more in preparation, we are at something like 45,000 manuscripts that have been sold. And it's only the 19th century. And because they all look the same, now we have all the pipeline, all the workflow, all the models that will help us produce a lot of data quickly and easily, or at least as much as quickly and as easily as we can today. And create the database of all the manuscripts sold in Paris in the 19th century in a few months, and I'll keep working on that after the end of the project. Which help us know that for Madame de Sévigné, there have been 633 sales that have been identified until 1903. And among these sales, 46 autograph manuscripts have been sold at least one time, 14 at least 2 times. And 13 letters out of the 46 sold are not in public libraries or archives. That is to say that it's something like 1% of all the letters identified by Roger Duchesne that are still circulating on the market, and we cannot put our hands on those letters. If we add to this fact, the fact that the Guiteau family, a very rich aristocratic family that live in Burgundy, have 62 letters, we can go from 1 to 5% of the total that has survived, that is not accessible to scholars. This is a crucial information because when you're a text editor, you're a philologist, you need to know what you edit. You need to know how many manuscripts you are and how relevant is the text that you're producing. With such figures and such an approach of the history of documents, we think that we could, to the margin, of course, improve the quality of editions over time by helping philologists and scholars to have a better access to sources and resources. I have not mentioned that here, but in many catalogs, you have a picture of the document that is sold. especially when the writer is pretty famous. So with this database, we can also have access to some reproductions of documents that have been sold over time. Based on this algorithm, we have developed a small application freely available online. When I say we, in this case, it's Alexandre. I'm trying to pay tribute to all the people that have been working. And you can have access to all the documents freely encoded in CEI. So you can browse it and have a look at the entire catalog. You can also look for documents. You can view the results for one author, let's say, by sale. So each time there is a sale and Sévigné has been sold in this case, well, there is an entry. But also thanks to the reconciliation script, view all the manuscripts that have been sold. And you can see here, each time the manuscript has been sold over time, which makes it very easy, for instance, to compare manuscript description, but also the evolution of price, etc., etc. So 45 minutes, I think I have more or less kept my promise. And I could not finish this presentation by expressing all my thanks and because they've helped so much. Béatrice Joyeux-Prunel, who is now a professor of digital humanities at the University of Geneva, who supported a lot this project and trying to develop something similar for exhibition of paintings, sculptures, etc., and trying to feed her database of exhibitions in the world. Thibaut Cléris, Jean-Baptiste Camps, who are working at the École des Chartes, and Carobine Corbière, who was also an intern and worked for Béatrice and her exhibition catalogs. And finally, Laurent Romary from the INRIA, who really helped with the OCR and all the open source problems. And yep, I think I'm done. I have prepared, if you're interested, I think I have access to the application and I can show very quickly how it works. Otherwise, any question is okay.
Thanks a lot. I'm knocking on behalf of everyone. so I'm not really happy with this reaction mode on Zoom where you can virtually clap, but I'll do it anyways. Thank you, really. We already got one question in the chat, and I think it's a good one to take it off, because it also ties us back to your initial hypothesis or the initial problem to see how many manuscripts are there even left. And Isabella Stucchi was asking if today, if it's not already clear how many texts are privately owned, if we can look at insurance policies. But,
I'm pretty sure that it's very clear for people who have insurance companies, but not for scholars. This is something, okay, I don't know who is in the classroom, but I am not a billionaire. And so I don't really understand what these people do with these manuscripts. But for some of them, there is a pleasure to own a manuscript that no one has ever seen. And they don't want other people to know that they have the manuscripts. This question, though, is very interesting, because at the end of the 19th century, it was very easy to know who owned the manuscripts. At the end of the 19th century, a big edition of Madame de Sévigné, for instance, which is the case on which I've been working quite a lot, he lists the names of all the rich people that gave access to their collections so that the editor can have a look at the documents that are kept in the collections. This today is impossible. Second, and then this is weirder, but still it has to be said, and there is right now a Ponzi scheme that has exploded in Paris. It's called the Aristophile problem, scandal. Millions and millions of euros have vanished because they were trying to make money out of manuscripts. You can make money out of gold, of, I don't know, corn, bottles of wines, paintings, but also manuscripts. So they were basically storing manuscripts in a bank and selling actions, shares of pieces of manuscripts so that you could try to make money out of that. And part of the business is that you don't know what is the package of manuscript that you buy. So then that's part of the game, so that you don't know. So first answer is rich people don't necessarily want you to know that you have the manuscript. Second, then you have investors who are trying to make money out of manuscripts, and they also don't want you to know what they have.
That's quite absurd, and I think that would be like a second question from my side before I go into the technical details. But you're a philologist, so you have a certain appreciation for those manuscripts because they are, in a sense, like your direct sources. I mean, you know how to handle them, but why do you see this market occur? Since I'm a historian, that's of interest to me. Why do you see this markets like being created in the 18th and 19th century? I mean, it's a business. You print these catalogs, and it makes sense to do. So how can you explain this this happening? And because I mean, this is basically creating the whole problem for you. So so where does this come from?
I think that there are many reasons. One of the most simple would be that there is the birth of the famous author, the artist. The fact that in the 19th century, you have all this appearance of like the notion of the great author and the genius. So you want to have the piece of this genius. This is clearly something that is very important. Then you also have, and it's a bit different, but at the same time still a bit the same, the idea that you can collect everything. And it's the time where people start collecting stones, collecting manuscripts, and they collect everything. And I mean, as an historian, you probably had sometimes to look at these journals of the middle of the 19th century, or some guy in the middle of a small village in Nidwald look at the record of the church and describe what is inside. And I don't know, it's something that they did, and that was the zeitgeist, and they all were interested in that. So I think that you can find like some logical answers about the apparition of the author as a genius, and at the same time, some behaviors that appear and disappear. And it's still there, but it's different, as I've said. Like these collectors have changed, even though some of them, and the Bodmer collection that we have in Switzerland is probably one of the best examples of someone who would share his collection. Right. And there is another one called Jean Godin, who really give access to his library to all the scholars who want. So not all the private collectors keep things secret.
Mm. Yeah, I think what you now can see is that it's also used to display some sort of wealth and try to show this humanistic interest and stuff. Yeah, I'd say see that. We're still open for questions. I don't want to monopolize the discussion, so you can raise your hand if you want. You can pitch in directly. We're only about 30 people, so that shouldn't be a problem when 2 people are talking. So if you have a question, you can also write it to the chat, however you want. So my technical question would go in the direction of, so you build the structural models which are derived from the encyclopedia. In terms of general text in general, do you envision that this is the direction technologically that it's going for all sorts of text? So do you think that sooner or later we're going to have something for, like, I don't know, registers, which would be quite close to the encyclopedia, for some, I don't know, minutes, for whatever, you have poems? So do you think that we start like switching our profession to this modeling approach, or is this just like, since the encyclopedias and your sales catalogs are so neatly like built that it's only for that, or is that a broader movement?
I think that this is an excellent question, and at first I just thought that, oh, it's an interesting tool for what I want. And then with time, I have discovered the power of that and how it works. Actually, Grubit started to extract bibliographical information. And as a scholar, you probably spend hours correcting how the footnotes is organized, because the editor says that it has to be between brackets and this after a colon. This is super structured, so it's easy to extract. Then the second step after bibliography clearly is a dictionary or something that is entry-based, because it's easier. You also have a technological problems, and that I take from the guys at the INRIA. But there is a problem of the computer able to handle a huge amount of text to structure. A bibliography is just a few characters, so the computer can swallow that. Then with more power, you can have a good entry of a catalog or a dictionary. Slightly longer, but it's okay. Then if you want to do, let's say, a chapter, because obviously that would be one of the interesting goals, would be like to take the novel and put the PDF and have an XML TI structured document produced automatically. Technically, there is a problem of the length that you have to handle. But this is a question of time. And I'm pretty sure that within a few months or years, we will end up with models able to deal with that. So when I see the technicity and the complexity to handle that just for catalogs right now, this is not for tomorrow, okay? But right now, you can pretty easily produce the data. If you train a model, training a model is about a few days if you know how it works and have something efficient, and then you need, I don't know, 30 minutes for a catalog or something, and then it depends on the quality that you want. Soon, in a few years, it will be able to deal with novels. And then the question that when it will be accessible is another problem. And the FNF project was also about that. The question about having a model for my data is okay. So we know that we can extract data from a catalog, but can we have a model that generalizes enough so that it handles your data with my model? Then it will be more tricky as well. So let's say that it's the two directions. Generalization of the model, because CRF is good with small models, but obviously you would need to have something with machine learning, but it's more advanced neural networks and stuff. And then the second problem is the length that you have to deal with.
I get that. So the direction I'm thinking from is like a bit different, because what we currently, as I understand it, what we're mostly doing is like let the machine do as much as possible. Like, let's throw in the text and we want to see what it's about. So like, I don't know, semantic analysis or stuff are going in that direction. So so if you take the FLAIR framework, Zalando wants to know if this review is positive or negative. It doesn't care about the text. But what the Growbit is the direction of Growbit, in my sense, is that we put some sort of structure in it and at the same time use the power of machine learning. So like trying to put the both together and then at the same time use our experience, our knowledge about the structure of text to hint the machine in certain directions. So for me, that could also be a huge chance to go in the direction of a white box artificial intelligence where we can use the machine learning approach, deep learning approaches where it's built upon, but at the same time also like induce some structural parts in order to say, okay, we know how it should be more or less looking like. And then the question would really be, so how are we building models? And I think that brings us back to a talk that never happened on this Ringvorlesung from Michal Piotrowski, because he proposes all the time that the DH is mostly about modeling, and that it's about like bringing up models for certain specific fields from the humanities and use computers to use these models in a
yeah, clearly. And you can in a way see that in different ways. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning the mathematical model to evaluate what is left. This Chow model, and you have to listen to my Kesterman presentation. It's freely available on YouTube. I can send the link if you want to. It's super interesting. He's a brilliant scholar, and it's very good to listen to what he says. But the idea is like you have this mathematical model, then you have this also TI model, and then you have these Growbit models, and all of them are more or less linked together. And this is very important because also the problem is that depending on the model that we choose for the TI encoding, for instance, and this is not easy because if you take the TI, which is, okay, Growbit is being developed mainly under the direction and supervision of Laurent Romary, who used to be at the board of the TI Council. And the idea is to create standardized data. So you want to produce data that's standardized. But then the TI obviously offers limitations that are good for you, because then it keeps interoperability and all that stuff. But the modelization is very complex because you have the data and you have to, and that is a limit of modelization. It's like you're limited by the tool because you have these CRF models,
right?
And you cannot go beyond that thing, that there is a one model per level in the XML hierarchy. And because we're using a dictionary model, we cannot do anything we want. So on the left, we cannot do what we want because of the tool. And then we have the TI on the right. We cannot do whatever we want with the XML too. So this is also a problem. Like, true modelization is really a big problem, but how do we handle a modelization with so many constraints? And this is also a problem. And with Lucie Rondeau, who did her internship the first time, we spent really a lot of time and struggled quite a lot to find something that would fit the Groby model and the TEI requirements.
Right. Maybe that's a good point. I think not everyone is aware what TEI is. Maybe you can elaborate briefly on that.
Yes.
Sorry, should have mentioned that earlier.
No. That is not a problem. Maybe I can just like quickly share and like go back to an example so that it makes it faster. Basically, the TEI is so you see my slide here with TI encoding, right?
Yes.
Here you have a document in TI. So basically, TI is a vocabulary that you use with a specific language that is XML. XML is a markup language, which is to say that it's not a programming language, but it's a way to encode. Let's put it again. So you have here one entry. So you open the entry here and you close it here. It's called a tag. So you open the tag and you close the tag, and everything that is in between is the item. This is XML because you have always this way to write the opening tag here and how to close the tag there. This is how you open it and close it. And here, the name of the elements that you choose is something that you cannot really decide yourself. It's a group that is called a TEI that has developed a vocabulary. So you have to follow the vocabulary that they have chosen. So you have a language that is XML, this way to put in between tags the information. And then the TEI, that is the vocabulary that you put in between the brackets. That is the vocabulary that you use with basically what you would call the syntax. XML is the syntax, the rule how to use it. The TI is the vocabulary, the name of the element. And it's a standard since the 80s that has been used by most of the scholars working with text. And now it's also used for music with something that is not the TEI, but the MEI, Music Encoding Initiative. I don't know if it helps. It's hard to sum up in a few words, but basically it's a way to encode the document like that.
I think that puts it perfectly. I was just to get some background in that direction. Unfortunately, we didn't have a TEI course in like 1 or 1.5 years here in Bern, but we need to come up with that again. Also, the MEI, the MEI, the Music Encoding Initiative, is quite strong at the University of Bern. So at the musicology, we have some experts in that regard if someone's interested.
Yeah, cool. And it's pretty important to use it. It's a standard, so it allows everyone to communicate, and it's really something that is worth spending a bit of time on that.
Exactly. Good. I don't see a further question in the chat. If anybody wants to come up with anything, I think on YouTube we didn't have a question either. So I think that's the time to wrap it up for today. Thank you very much, Simon. We'll see us again, and we'll pick you up on the workshop so that we can really try it out one time, hopefully sometimes in spring when it makes sense to sit together again. Thanks for your time, and thanks for the whole team for being here. That's really great. You have some last final words for us?
No, I mean, we will probably present the final results in a few months. So if you're interested in like having all the data and a presentation of everything in Geneva, we will have a final presentation of the entire project in the seminar of Béatrice Joyeux-Brunel. So if you're interested in the results, you can come. And everything is CC BY, so you can use everything that we have produced without any limitation, basically just saying that it's us. So if you want to play with the data for anything, training named entity recognition, or trying to study the history of phylogeny, everything is for free and is available, so feel free to use it.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Vielen Dank für die Aufmerksamkeit und wir sehen uns in 2 Wochen wieder zum letzten Vortrag dann von Lukas Rosenthaler zur digitalen Nachhaltigkeit. So we'll finish up this lecture series with eternity and the upkeeping of our digital data. Danke.
Bitte.